This story happened just a few years back when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne, while also taking advantage of the free place to stay so I could attend a meeting with my LARP group. For those who don't know what LARP is, it's basically real-life role-playing. Imagine a D&D game, but instead of people sitting around a table with dice, you have people actually dressed up as their characters and role-playing in real life. LARPing had been my hobby since I was 14, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I started going a bit more all out when it came to gear. One of the things I spent a solid amount of money on was my character's armor. Important for this story, the chainmail I wear under my outer armor. After the group meeting, I took most of my LARP outfit off because I really didn't want to walk through Cologne-Mülheim, which is one of the more dangerous parts of the city, dressed as a medieval knight. But since I couldn't fit everything into my bag, I kept my chainmail on, along with my tunic and pants. On the bus ride back, I noticed a guy who seemed to be watching me, but I assumed it was because I still looked very out of place. When he got off at the same stop as me, I didn't really pay him much attention. I was almost at my friend's place and decided to call him, asking if he wanted to meet up and grab a doner. He agreed before I even finished the question. I arrived at our meeting spot first and waited. That's when I noticed the guy from the bus again. This time he walked straight toward me. I moved closer to the wall to make space, but instead of passing me, he stopped right in front of me, pulled out a knife, and demanded my bag, wallet, and phone. I was willing to give him my wallet, but I tried to explain that the bag only contained some armor and foam weapons. Apparently, even talking was enough to set him off. Suddenly, I felt two fast, stinging punches to my stomach. The pain was intense, and I collapsed to the ground as the guy grabbed my bag. Honestly, the next moments are a blur. I could barely focus on anything except the voice in my head screaming, "You got stabbed." The next thing I remember is my friend shaking me. My bag was open, my gear scattered everywhere, and he was holding my helmet, with blood on it. He later told me he saw the guy rummaging through my bag, probably realizing it was too heavy and bulky to steal. My friend, seeing me on the ground, grabbed the first thing he could reach, the helmet, and hit the attacker with it until he ran away. When we checked my stomach later, I had two massive deep blue bruises that hurt like hell, but only small cuts. The chainmail had stopped the knife. To this day, I still feel sick when I think back on that night. If I hadn't been wearing that one piece of my LARP gear, I would be dead, literally killed over a bag full of costumes, $150 in my wallet, and a 10-year-old phone. This world is fucked up. This happened a couple of years ago when I was a senior in high school living in Southern California. It was later in the evening, sometime between 8 o'clock and 8:30, and my mom and I had just gotten home from a long day of driving and visiting family, only to discover that our cat was completely out of food. I was tired of being in the car by then and really didn't want to go to Petco to get cat food. My mom begged me to go with her, so I finally caved and said yes. Looking back now, I am so grateful that I did, because if I hadn't decided to go, I think there's a good chance my mom would have never come home. Another important detail I want to mention is that the windows on my mom's car were extremely tinted, making it pretty much impossible to see inside. We pulled into the Petco parking lot, and I looked around and noticed there were only a few other cars, with one parked a few rows behind us. My mom said I could wait in the car since she was just going in quickly to pick up food. A minute after my mom got out of the car and was halfway to the store, the car that had been parked a few rows back pulled into the spot right next to ours on the passenger side. I thought it was a little strange, but assumed the person just wanted a closer spot. A man stepped out of the car, got his large German Shepherd out of the back, and walked into the store. I was looking inside the store and noticed this guy watching my mom and following her around, but not closely enough for her to notice. He got ahead of her in line, and after he checked out, he stood outside the entrance watching her check out. When my mom walked out of the store, the guy started walking behind her. At this point, I started to get a really bad feeling and felt extremely creeped out. When my mom made it back to our car, she opened the trunk to put the cat food inside. The guy opened the back of his car right next to ours and started talking to her, motioning for her to come look at something in the back of his car. My mom, completely oblivious, took a few steps closer and looked into the back of his car. His hand started moving toward her waist, and I immediately started yelling for her to get into our car right now. The guy looked extremely shocked. I'm guessing he never saw me sitting in the car, and he immediately stopped talking to her. My mom looked very confused, but after I yelled at her again to get into the car, she finally did. The creepy guy immediately got into his car and drove off in a hurry. When my mom got into the car, I asked her what the guy had been saying to her. She told me he was telling her to look at something he got for his dog that was in the back of his car. I told her everything I had observed and said that I was pretty sure he had been trying to abduct her. Creepy Petco guy, let's not meet ever again. This happened when I was around 17 years old and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked with work colleagues who didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had a half day on Fridays, so I would just spend the rest of the day wandering around the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of relentless mocking, and I was reaching my breaking point. I went around the city looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the Army, Navy, and Air Force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned a corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly now. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in." I then looked up at the building, and in a big fancy sign outside it said, "The Church of Scientology." Now before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. However, I had a morbid curiosity about it. I had heard all the horror stories going on inside the church. But Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty well. My famous last words right there. So I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak to somebody about the church and the personality test. She smiled and said, "I would be happy to please take a seat and I will get you someone to speak to." After a minute, I was introduced to an older man named Alan, and he was the head of my city's Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed the large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and genuinely had a nice talk. I told him about how I was unhappy with where my life was going. I told him about how I wanted to leave, plus all the trouble I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me, and I felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give it to the receptionist after I had finished. 2 hours later, I finished it. I'm not joking. That's really how long it took. It was around 500 questions about anything and everything. I handed it in to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was just going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema. It could seat around 50 people and had a large screen at the front. It did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people, or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you sometimes get, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section about how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked a door but going back to check multiple times. At one point, the film showed how a past event that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. For example, your mother being sick on a flight, causing you to be scared of flying. I also vaguely remember something about rotten eggs and how much an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some ways the film really made sense to me. When the film was done, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had ever met, lacking cognitive thinking, and that I was a waste of talent. This made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD. He told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. I asked what course, and Alan told me he had signed me up to do a course at the center. He convinced me that if I didn't do this course, my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about it, which would start in a month's time. I left the center, ran home, and immediately started reading the books I was given. This went on all weekend. I basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVD over and over again. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions and concerns. I started resenting my mother for my life. I began to think she was the problem, that everything bad that happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her and doing the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst for my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her. And I took that bullshit seriously. I made plans to totally leave her out of my life. A week before my course, I developed some kind of God complex toward everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me. I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me and they searched my room. My dad took out all of my Scientology books and the DVD. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them. I told them how I was going to leave them and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing back and forth followed, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said if you were so miserable at work, you should have told us, and that is true. To this day, I can't believe I didn't say anything to them. Instead, I went to Scientology. That night, after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I had treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared for me. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I would not be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to me asking why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced not to go. However, I ignored him. The emails I received in the next few weeks were mad. He told me things like I should leave my family now and that I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of how he wouldn't be surprised if he read in the papers that I was found dead by suicide. I'm very sure he crossed a line there, but I just kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was written entirely in binary code. 0011010111 this and 1000101010 that. I used a binary code translator, but it all came back as mixed up letters and numbers. None of it made sense. I eventually blocked him. However, it still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year, I get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block the email address, but they just keep coming. It's always someone new, saying they heard about my case and that they were worried about me. The whole reason I'm writing this is because I just got one the other day, and I thought it would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can make me into a spiteful degenerate in just a few hours, then what can they do to a person in a few months or a year? And if you're lost in life, sad or upset, then please talk to your family, friends, or a doctor. When you're down, don't let others turn you into a monster. Take it from me. After this event, I got help, and I'm a happy, confident person now. I once met up with an old friend of mine, someone I had known for a few years prior to this meetup in November 2017. I had actually met this person on a dating site. However, as time went on, the relationship between us became strictly platonic. There were no red flags, my gut did not warn me, so I completely trusted this person. We met up in town behind a bus station on a grassy hill surrounded by trees and a tall wall. Our meeting was just to have a smoke, get a little high, and have a small catch-up. The meetup was fine. I had only started smoking weed a few months earlier, so I was still relatively new to it. He had brought something new for me to try. Purple haze. I wasn't anxious about trying it at all, as I completely trusted him and never believed he would lie to me. He packed a full blunt for me, but I only managed to smoke about a quarter of it. We talked during this time about work, our previous relationships, and random things. About half an hour later, I started to feel extremely lightheaded and anxious. Suddenly, I had this strange feeling where I didn't feel comfortable at all and I really wanted to go home. When I asked if I could go home, he offered to take me, but I said, "No, it's okay." He offered again, saying, "Please let me take you home. You'll be safe with me. I wouldn't hurt you." I shook my head and said, "No, thank you. I can take myself home." When I started to walk away, it felt like I was walking on a cloud. My head became dizzy and my eyesight started to blur. I had never felt like this before, and over time I began to panic. As we made our way down the hill toward the bus station, I felt relieved because there were a lot of people around. If anything happened, someone would step in. I became extremely terrified of him. I had this horrible feeling in my gut telling me to get away from him. When we reached the bus station, I told him I would call a taxi there and go home. His tone was no longer nice, but very stern. "I'm gonna take you home now," he said, and he began to pull at my jacket. I told him no and said I was going home on my own. He pulled harder and I fell against him. He pulled me into him and told me I didn't need to be scared of him, but I was so terrified. At this point, I felt extremely paranoid and I couldn't see properly. I pushed him away and rubbed my eyes, then called for a taxi. He tried to pull my phone from me and yelled in my face, "Do you ever listen? I'm taking you home." I noticed a few people had stopped and asked if I was okay. All I remember is that I wanted to go home. A woman kindly called a taxi for me, waited with me, made sure I was okay, and helped me into the taxi. While I was waiting, he kept trying to get me to go to his car with him, but the woman who was looking after me told him to go home and said she was going to make sure I got home instead. So, he left. When I got home, I paid the taxi driver and told him to keep the change. I didn't want to wait around. I just wanted to get into my bed because at that moment it felt like the only place I would be safe from harm. That evening I lay in my bed for 5 hours straight staring at the ceiling. I don't remember if I thought about anything or if my mom came in at any point. I just remember lying there doing nothing until the paranoia and sickly feeling began to wear off. When I finally looked at my phone, I saw I had 32 missed calls from him, 10 voicemails, and over 50 messages. The messages were disturbing. Around 20 of them were just asking where I was and whether I had made it home. In one of the voicemails, he described a fantasy about taking me home while I was drugged, tying me up, blindfolding me, and making me submit to him. I completely freaked out and blocked him on all social media, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, and blocked his number. Before blocking him, I told him that if he ever contacted me again, I would call the police. I didn't hear anything from him for a month. Then I received a text from an unknown number asking how I was. I hadn't given my number to anyone, so I ignored it. A few minutes later, I received another message saying they missed me and that they would see me soon. I asked who it was. There was no reply. I've spoken to some friends about what happened, and all of them have said that weed would never make someone feel this way. Many of them believe I was given spice, not weed. Spice looks a lot like weed, but the effects are far stronger and much more dangerous. This was back right after 9/11 happened. I was driving by myself across the country to get to my son, who was with my ex. I had been out of state taking care of a sick family member. It was the middle of the night in New Mexico when I saw police lights behind me. I was exhausted and annoyed because I hadn't been speeding or anything. There weren't really any other cars on the road, and I was close to the exit for the hotel I planned to stop at for the night. I pulled over and the cop came up to the driver's side window, which in itself was weird because they usually approach the passenger side on busy roads, and this was a highway. I gave him all my documents and he just stared at me for the longest time. He walked back to his car and then returned almost immediately. He told me to step outside the car. At that point, I was worried. I had gotten tickets before, but being asked to step out of the car wasn't normal for me. I did as he said, and he asked if I had been drinking. I said no and asked why he pulled me over. He said I was driving erratically, which wasn't true. He then asked me if I was a terrorist, which was absurd. I was a young white American woman just driving, so there was really no reason for that question. It was weird, and I was also a veteran and had ID. He gave me a walk-the-line sobriety test, which I passed. Then he said he needed to search my car to see if I had drugs. I thought about it for a minute because I knew my rights, but it was so late and I was so tired. I didn't want to deal with the hassle of refusing, so I agreed because I knew I didn't have anything in my car. When he got to my truck, he opened a small suitcase I had that contained my dancer stripper stuff. He asked about it and I told him I was a stripper. That really set him off and he started screaming at me, calling me a trash person. This pissed me off and I started really looking at my situation. I was alone with this weird guy and only occasionally would a car pass by. For the most part, the road was empty. It was the middle of the night, I had nothing to protect myself, and he had a gun. He then told me I needed to walk back into the tree line next to the road. I stared at him and said no. I demanded that he call for backup and have other officers come. This threw him off. I told him I wanted a female officer and that I would no longer comply with anything he said. I also started trying to wave down passing cars when they did go by. He told me to calm down, wrote out a speeding ticket, and let me go. I never paid the ticket and never heard a word about it. This was 20 years ago. At the time, I was really shaken and eventually forgot about it, but looking back now, I don't think he was a real cop. I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and was getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were, walking into the open door of my room. The typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" I complained about how Daphne wasn't there and went on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait, if Daphne isn't here, who is that?" I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was the 60s. And obviously we weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline. Then my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." Just like she'd hoped, the man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone into the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because our parents had left her in charge and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat for carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO, she was home alone, and authorities found the door open with no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop and we just didn't recognize him. He was a lifelong friend of the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay. They did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and said she had been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but he was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action.